Are you ready to embark on a journey of success? To discover your true potential in the untold stories of careers in life sciences? Welcome to PATHFINDER by the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. With your host, Tommy Soares, discover the untold stories of industry scientists and unveil the secrets to excelling in your career. Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Welcome, everybody. My name is Tommy Soares. I'm Director of Scientific Strategy and Relations of the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology, and Infectious Disease. And today on PATHFINDER, I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Steve Ouellette, who's currently immersed in the cutting edge of synthetic biology and complex biologics, serving as the head of innovation at Ansa Biotechnologies, a next-generation enzymatic DNA synthesis company. He has previously held titles including co-founder and CTO, patent agent, scientist, consultant, and head of intellectual property. He has served as principal investigator on multiple SBIR projects awarded by the National Cancer Institute. Steve has extensive experience developing strategies for biotech product research and development, intellectual property management, and go-to-market planning. Steve holds a PhD in molecular pharmacology and cancer biology from Purdue University and a BS in biochemistry from Western Michigan University. Welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Tommy. It was really great to hear from you. I've watched a few of these Pathfinder podcasts previously, a lot of familiar faces in that lineup. So really happy to be here and now be part of that lineup.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you saw some of the familiar faces. As you know, I try to tap into my network, and you definitely, sir, are part of this network. And I'm so glad that I reached out to you, and so glad to see such an illustrious career already shaping up, and such a great journey so far, Steve. It's going to be exciting to hear a little bit about it.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's been a kind of a wild ride, full of twists and turns, and sort of taking me wherever the wind blows. So happy to talk about it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you have had so many wonderful titles. And as you know, our audience it wants to know, well, what is the development of going from scientist to doing, becoming the principal investigator, or becoming a patent agent, or a consultant, or, all these different hats that you've worn throughout and that you continue to play. Perhaps you can take us back to where it all began, and we can go from there. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I can try to put this in a nutshell. So when I did my undergrad at Western Michigan University, I worked in a couple of labs. And towards the end of my time there, I ended up being recommended for an internship at this company called CTOX. And CTOX was a startup founded by some people who were from Pfizer. So in Kalamazoo, there's all these mergers and acquisitions that happen. So there's a pharmaceutical company called Pharmacia that was bought by Pfizer. They, downsized some things, and one of them was their in vitro toxicology department. So there were 4 people from that department that started this company called CTOX. And so what they did, they were a contract research organization. They profiled small molecules against a panel of biochemical toxicity assays, and then they could put the results through an algorithm that predicted the concentration at which you'd see toxicity in an animal model. So they did this for other pharmaceutical companies developing small molecules, and they needed basically some lab hands. And so my research mentor at Western Michigan had Sue Stapleton. She had some connections to that company, and she, kind of put this position in front of me. And I said, yeah, I definitely want to try this out. So I started working there, and it was a very small company, right? So I think there was 8 or 10 people total. I got to work with, the founders, the CSO, the COO, and they all had PhDs. So I found the work really intriguing, but I really liked what they did, right? And they had the PhD. So I said, okay, now I have to go back to grad school. Um, so I applied to Purdue, the Pulse program, and the Pulse program was really attractive to me because it's sort of this umbrella program. It lets you try out labs in different departments. You weren't, siloed into a single department, so that was really attractive to me. The whole interdisciplinary was really attractive to me. And then I landed in Lori Parker's lab at Purdue, and we were working on cell-based kinase activity assays. And so that was really interesting to me for a few reasons. Kinase biology, it plays a part in so many roles, right? Especially in cancer, but also immunology and aging and all these different things. So, it sort of gives you access to a lot of different things. So I was working in that lab and developing these assays, and I realized I didn't want to be in academia. I had come from industry. Academia I never wanted to be a professor. Uh, and so Lori was kind enough to help me recognize that, and then she gave me some roles in the lab that started helping me build complementary skill sets to just doing the science, right? And that was namely intellectual property. So in the lab, I started helping write up disclosures of the inventions our lab was developing. Was sort of the liaison with the tech transfer office at Purdue. Was involved with sort of building that patent portfolio. And right around the same time, there was a fellowship that became available. I know the acronym was PrEP. I can't remember exactly. It's Purdue Realization and Entrepreneur something something. Um, but I applied for that and won it. And so that fellowship basically gave me a year-long boot camp on how to put together a business plan, how to conceive a business, how to write up the plan. And so during that year, I used our patent portfolio that we were working on as the core tech, built a business plan around it. And then, when I defended, as they say, I took the leap and decided to go full in on the company. I started pitching to investors in the Midwest, which in 2014 wasn't super productive, at least for me. We can get into investor strategy later, but I ended up learning a lot about the SBIR and STTR programs offered by NSF and NIH and all of the funding agencies, and really dug into that and learned the ins and outs. And then we eventually had 2 SBIRs hit. So 2 applications were awarded. Along with matching from funds from Elevate in the state of Indiana, that ended up being around $500,000 total. And so with that, a little bit of money, we were able to begin lab operations. And so it was all these new sets of problems, right? Like, how do you build a lab? Where do you do the work? All these things. And so I worked with you and I worked with Natasha at Binley to get our first, bench space in Binley, where we started doing the work. And then Purdue and Purdue Foundry gave me so much support. We were able to set up another shared lab space and get that going. And I worked on that. We had operations going for about 2 years. Along the way, developed some partnerships, one with a big pharma to develop an assay for them using our core technology. Worked with some academic groups who sent us some of their small molecules that we could test using our assays we were developing. So it was, you just learned so much. And then I would say that probably the most influential thing I did during that time at Kinesense was participate in this program called iCore, or Innovation Core. So I was able to do that having the SBIR. The NIH offered a national program for this. And what it is, it's a 2-month program where you take a team of 3 people that represent the company, And then you go and you do, well, you make, so they teach you this thing called the business model canvas. And maybe some of the listeners have heard of this, but it's all the different aspects of a business, from product market fit to revenue models to partnerships, all these different things. And you go through the business model canvas and you make assumptions about each one of those things. And then you test those assumptions by going out and talking to people who know. So you have to go out and you do informational interviews with people who can, give you real answers, not just guesses about these different aspects of your business model. And so you're supposed to talk to at least 100 people in 2 months. And so that was like one of the most intense learning experiences of my life. But it also sort of opened up access to the broader ecosystem and starting to understand it, and how all of these different things working together, how all the money flows through a business. How do you bring a product to market? What does the business have to do to make that happen? All these different things. And you start to appreciate all the different roles that are required. And so unfortunately, kind of since hit a wall with the technical development, and we had to wind down. But I was able to take all of that experience, especially the IP, and then I pivoted into IP. So that's when I moved out of Indiana after we wound kind of sense down. Went into a company called Global Prior Art, and they're in Boston. And I worked as an IP analyst there for a while, largely doing IP research and cell and gene therapy and diagnostics, biomarkers, all these different things. And from there, I was recruited to a law firm called Cooley. Cooley's they're one of the biggest law firms that service biotech companies. So they handle everyone from founders. I had clients, everyone who were founders in stealth mode through public companies. And I worked on their patent portfolios, due diligence associated with rounds of funding, IPOs. We represented investment banks. So you get to see a lot of different things working there. And that's where I was a patent agent, right? So I did that as a patent agent. And then after I was there for about 2 years, Ansa Biotechnologies reached out to me. They were around seed stage then. I think I was employee number 22, but they were looking for a head of intellectual property to come in and sort of establish that function in-house, because there's so much awesome research going on in their groups. They've got a chemistry group, biochemistry, protein engineering, hardware engineering, and they're developing all this IP. So they needed somebody to come in and harvest it and then work with outside counsel to get it patented. Yeah. And so I went in and established that function and started getting, helping them get their IP momentum going. And then we hired a patent attorney, and I transitioned to this role that I'm in now called head of innovation. And so what this role is, it's largely, it's kind of, there's a lot of hats, but I would say one of the main hats is talking to customers, doing what's called voice of customer research, and trying to understand what kind of DNA they need, what can't they get, what do they dislike about our competitors, all these different aspects. And then I take that information back to the technical team, and we try to come up with a product roadmap and position the enzymatic DNA synthesis platform to deliver the best solutions.
So back to the 100 phone calls.
Back to the 100 phone calls. So yeah, I'm on, we just launched, we're pre-commercial, we're still in development, and we just launched an early access program, which is kind of like getting a prototype into the market and learning about what people like about it, what they dislike, what they ultimately want. And we launched that back in April, and it's back to the 100 phone calls thing. So, we announced this, people are reaching out. I'm on, 10 Zooms a week, talking to scientists all over the place, working primarily in complex biologics. But yeah, it's interesting. And it's, like I said, a winding path, but I love it.
What an awesome journey so far, Steve. And it's so awesome how one thing just kind of led to another and it
Yeah.
led to another, and you've just been continuing to gain momentum. I wonder, when you were in Lori's lab, did you know you liked intellectual property? Did you know you wanted to get more on the business side of the science rather than being in the lab bench making discoveries? Although you were
Well,
doing both, right?
I had heard of patents at that point, and I knew that they were critical to business. Um, my perspective is deepened on intellectual property, but I think that it was more about not saying no to an opportunity that I thought had a lot of potential.
Oh,
Right.
awesome.
So even though I didn't know a lot about it at the time, it was an opportunity to build a complementary skill set. And I think I was making that a priority around the time. There was a lot of noise being made around this idea that there was a default path for PhDs to go into a postdoc, right? And there was a lot of noise being made around the idea that most of the positions that PhDs end up in don't require a postdoc. And so in some ways, it's for a lot of folks, it ends up being a waste of 2 or 5 or 8 years, right? Depending on how long the postdoc is. And so I think that made me a little more aware of um, listening to listen for opportunities. And so this was a good one. And Lori knew more about IP than I did. And so she was like, hey, this would be great for you. I can't thank her enough for helping me push me in that direction and giving me that opportunity.
But what is so remarkable is what you said, is your ability just to welcome the new opportunity and not say no. We hear many
Yeah.
times people giving the advice of saying, well, you got to be very choosy. You have to say no to
Mhm.
most things and stay focused and so on. But what you're saying is that maybe during a time in our lives where we're exploring a career
Mhm.
path, maybe being more open is better, Steve? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. You think about upsides and downsides of taking chances and making decisions. And doing this little IP thing on the side in grad school didn't have a whole lot of downside, but it had a lot of upside. So I thought about it that way, and so it was worth it. It was a so I won't don't don't say yes to everything, but weigh that downside, upside, and then consider how it might help you in the future. Every decision you make opens and closes doors,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So I think we're getting a little more philosophical now, but um, I like my decisions to open more doors than they close.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It seems like they did bring that opportunity that continued to flourish into other opportunities
Yeah.
in your wheelhouse. Tell us a little bit about the I-Core. You described it as, okay, you had to do a lot of discovery calls and so on. But so was this NSF, NIH, I-Core? Was it that at that time? Was it NIH, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, so I did the NIH program.
Yeah.
NSF actually started it. So they had been doing it for a few years before NIH picked it up.
Okay.
I think we were one of the earlier cohorts in the national NIH program. Not like the first or the second, but maybe in the first 10. And my memory may be a little hazy around the exact number, but we were relatively early in the NIH national program. But yeah, they bring you in, like I said, as a team of three, and then they have a teaching team, and these are experienced entrepreneurs in the life sciences. They divide all of the teams. I think there must have been 24 teams or so. involved, and they all were SBIR awardees. So they were all small business teams. And they divided us up into three groups: therapeutics, medical devices, and diagnostics. Right. So even that alone, it's like, oh, well, you can start to partition these technologies in certain ways, and it changes the way you think about them. But then every team was given a mentor who had expertise in each of those categories, and you're doing your interviews, you're making presentations every week around, these were my assumptions about product market fit. And so in order to test our assumptions, we talked to scientists at X, Y, and Z company, and another assay developer at company, A, and then they either confirmed or they made us rethink our assumption. And so we had to present that to the entire group every single week, talking about who we talked to, why we talked to them, making all these notes about our conversations. And so, you get a lot of exposure really fast doing that I-Corps program. And also you learn the technique of testing assumptions with informational interviews. It's like an experimental method, right? So every assumption is like a hypothesis. As scientists, we're trained, we test our hypothesis using experiments. Every hypothesis has to be testable. You can apply that to your assumptions about a business model. But here you're not, measuring a molecule using a spectrophotometer or whatever. You're trying to access sort of insider trade secrets about how things work. And you don't usually find that in a textbook or in the literature. You certainly can't design an experiment you do on your own to test the assumption. You have to go out and you have to talk to people. You have to learn how to talk to them in a way where they feel comfortable giving you information. That was a whole big learning curve for the team, was how to talk to people. It sounds silly, but how to have one of these interviews and get the information that you needed. I remember one of our first interviews, it just went really bad. We somehow got, I think it was a VP level person at Genentech, right? And so we got that person on the phone, and this was in our first 10 interviews or something like that. And we had a list of questions that we were going to ask this person. And by the third or fourth question, the guy, he literally said, "I don't know why I'm talking to you," and hung up on us. Right? Because we didn't know how to have a conversation with the person. Nobody wants to sit there and like
answer.
Yeah. Right. They want to have a conversation. And so that was a big learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, but so amazing. That experience not only gave you a different perspective, but techniques like this communication technique. I'm sure this has helped you as you've gone, and well, obviously now and what you're doing as head of innovation in making these phone calls again and trying to figure out if the products that you're making need to be customized or directed in a different way, right? So neat, so neat. And so tell us again a little bit. So from Purdue, Lori had suggested a company that you should go and apply for. Is that how it works?
No. So I founded that company.
Oh, that's right. Kindnessense. You founded Kindnessense. Exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. And
so
then
started from nothing.
Right. And you started it from the ground up. I remember the lab bench that we gave you guys at Purdue, and but from there you got recruited on to your next position.
I had to search for it a little bit, but I didn't have any problem getting it. So I was kind of lucky. The stars kind of aligned. It was an analyst position at Global Prior Art in Boston. And so I came out, moved out here, took that position, and I guess a little more color on what I did there. Um, there's an intellectual property, there's a few types of searches that have to be done routinely. So if a company is developing a product, they have to do what's called a freedom to operate analysis, where they have to go out and make sure that the product they're developing does not infringe anyone else's IP. So how do you do that? Well, you have to search the patent literature to figure that out, and then you have to take all of the hits from your search and you have to analyze them to see whether or not the product overlaps with the IP. So that's one type of search I did frequently. Another is invalidity. So if a company, they're developing a product and it does infringe somebody else's patent, one position they can take is that the patent is invalid, right? So we did searches around trying to find what I'll call ammunition, showing that the invention existed in the world before the patent was filed. So we would help with these validity searches too. It included both patent searching and literature searching, but it was a lot of searching and sort of analyzing these documents. But that gave me a really strong awareness of the IP that's out there, especially around cell and gene therapy. I feel like that's where I developed the most IP knowledge, because a lot of the clients were in that space, both at Global Prior Art and at Cooley, which was the next position.
And so, but Cooley, you were recruited to Cooley, is that correct? They knew about you.
There was a recruiter who knew about the position, who reached out to me and asked if I wanted to apply. So that person wasn't directly affiliated with Cooley, but that's another thing that people looking for jobs should take advantage of, are recruiters. So a lot of PhDs become recruiters, but recruiters, they know the hiring managers, they know the companies, they know what positions are open, and they can point you in all the right directions. They can give feedback on your application package. So definitely taking advantage of recruiters is super helpful.
And so but you didn't seek out the recruiter. What you're saying is that perhaps if you're in this job search mode, that contacting recruiter or a headhunter might be a good idea for you. How do you prepare that, Steve? What's the best way to do that? Just look them up on LinkedIn, or how? Okay.
Exactly. You find people on LinkedIn, they'll have in their description the types of roles that they're trying to source for. And they specialize, right? So the recruiter or the patent agent position was a IP legal recruiter. So that recruiter knew about positions in law firms, they knew about legal positions within companies. So it's not just law firms that need patent agents, companies need patent agents too. That was the next position, the head of IP position.
Right.
So they'll have a good handle on what those positions are, and you can give them your requirements, right? You can say, here's my target salary range. I want to work only hybrid or remote, or I'm interested in these geographic areas. And they can help you sort of filter down all of the jobs that are most relevant.
That's awesome. And do you pay these people, or do they only get paid once you get the job?
Yeah, so I'm not a recruiter, so I don't know all of the ins and outs. I've worked with them, and typically it's the company, the organization that does the hiring that pays them.
I see.
Right.
Like a finder's fee or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I like I said, I don't know all the ins and outs. I've only heard the whispers. It can be a percentage of salary, or it can be a fixed rate, or it's different. Yeah.
And Steve, I see in your LinkedIn profile that you have a lot of experience with SBIR, STTR, grant writing. For people that don't know what the small business technology research grants are, or technology transfer research grants, what are these? What can you tell us a little bit about these particular grants that are different from your regular NCI, R01,
Oh yeah,
R21 type of
sure.
grants, or NIH or NSF? Like what are these SBIR, and what makes them so different or so unique?
Yeah, so the applicant for SBIRs and STTRs has to be a small business. Um, right. And so what they're for is funding small businesses for early stage product development. And so when you talk about the differences between an SBIR application and say an R01 or an R21, they're product focused. They're focused on taking a technology that probably has been demonstrated at, with experiments that say, well, it might work, right? But now, how do you turn that technology into a product that's ready for the market? And that's SBIR is there to fund that research. It comes in two phases. There's a phase one grant and there's a phase two grant. Phase one grants are depending on the organization, they're around 250,000. And they're for developing, sort of proof of concept for a product. And critically in these applications, and maybe what's a little different than an R01 is that you have to have quantitative milestones associated with your development plans that allow you to make go, no go decisions on whether, the product is going to work as intended. Mixed in with all of that, research plan is you have to demonstrate that there's a market for the target product, and that you have a good understanding of what it looks like to develop that product. So developing a research tool, for example, is a very different development plan than developing a therapeutic. And that's very different than developing a medical device. So baked into the application, you have to show that you understand all of the things, all the hoops, all of the partners, all these sorts of things that you have to obtain or jump through in order to build that product. And so I jumped the gun a little bit. There's phase two. If you're successful in phase one, you hit all of your data indicates go. Then you write a phase two application, which is much longer. It typically has a separate commercialization plan. And that can be up to, therapeutics, you can get up to 2 million, I'll say, from the NIH for developing that. But it's a longer project, it's 2 to 3 years typically. And it's, a million to 2 million. But yeah, there are certain requirements for the small business. It's got to be under 500 people. Yeah, yeah.
And so you got one of these for Kind of Sense, your company that you started off with, Lori. You wrote the thing. Is that what gave you this practice or this technique for being a good grant writer, SBIR grant writer?
Yeah, I wrote a lot of them. So the first, they didn't all get funded. But I think the first one I wrote was in collaboration. I'll say I didn't write it exclusively. I co-wrote it with a partner, Microfluidics Innovations. So that was a startup at Purdue from a while ago, Ahmed's company.
Yes.
But yeah, so they had a programmable lab on a chip, and we wanted to shrink our assay down to work on his chip. So he was the applicant in that case. This was an STTR, which is a little, I don't know if we want to get in the weeds on SBIR versus STTR.
Right.
They're both small business grants, but we were an academic collaborator on that grant. And so I helped, I co-wrote that. And I would say that's my first shot at writing an STTR. Lori, she did most of the work. I kind of, I would write something and then she would rewrite it.
Yeah.
Um, so that was sort of the first try, and with a resubmission, we got that
Awesome.
one. So I got to work on that STTR project, not as Kinesense, but as an academic researcher. And then, I started writing them for Kinesense. Um, First one didn't get through, but then the resubmission did. Um, and then we wrote a second one after we got the first one. That one got in with the resubmission, and then we just kept sort of writing them. But yeah,
Nice.
it's all about the practice. It's all about getting into, we'll say, the head of the reviewers and trying to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
And then really demonstrating that you understand that you're developing a product. You're not testing a hypothesis about basic biology.
Yeah. Yeah. You told us before that you hit a technical roadblock with Kinesense and the development of the technology. Um, it must have been a terrible realization and a terrible time. Uh, is there are there lessons that you learned from going through that you want to share?
Um, well, I mean, so you have to figure out how to gracefully wind down a company um, that has a learning curve on its own. At that point, we had two full-time employees. So helping them make sure they know what to do next, and keeping communication open so they know what's going on. Um, that the people, to me, is what's most important, is making sure that nobody's going to be no only good things happen to your people, right? Like, if you can ensure that, that's number one. So after we hit the technology roadblock and making sure that your people were going to land softly in a good spot, then it's, we have all this stuff. What are we going to do with it? How do you dissolve the company? But yeah, I mean, in terms of lessons, I feel like we did things correctly. I don't have, regrets on how we wound down the company. There's always that sort of itch in the back of my head where it's like, well, I could have gone 2 more months and tried this, and this.
Yeah.
Or I could have tried to find another technology to bring into the company to, like, breathe fresh life into it and maybe pivot the product strategy. Um, there's all these sorts of things, but nothing's ever going to be perfect. Yeah, I don't know if there's major lessons. There's a lot of learning along the way. Uh, but yeah, sort of the foundational um, lessons. I don't know if I can point to anything specifically.
But I guess, going through that experience, I'm fairly sure it prepped you for some of the work, especially that you're doing now at Ansa Biotechnologies. Tell us a little bit about this current role and what, you mentioned a little bit about the discovery calls that you still have to do, but tell us a
Yeah.
little bit how, these lessons as you've gone through and at Cooley and patent
Mhm.
agent and looking at, like, and also carrying the techniques and the science that you did at the workbench.
Mhm.
Now it seems like everything is coming to fruition, in a sense, right? That's why I've been so impressed by your career trajectory, Steve. It's awesome. It's really cool. But tell us a little bit about this head of innovation at
Yeah,
Ansa
yeah.
Biotechnologies.
Yeah, so, I went in when I first took the head of an intellectual property position. I said, I really miss these things. I love startups generally. I miss these things about what I used to do, which was, the informational interviews, sort of the higher level strategy, the product road mapping, all of these things. And so once we got the IP stuff under control, We had a great patent attorney come in and sort of take over. Then it was like, what needs to be done on the commercial side? And so for a little while, I was, commercial team of one, and I was mostly just going out and talking to folks, trying to understand the market a little better, and doing the competitive intelligence, trying to understand, when people need DNA now, where do they go and what do they do, and what do they dislike about it? And so that was the sort of, I'll call phase one of this head of innovation position. And in phase two, we hired a chief business officer, and then I reported directly to her. And then she was like, okay, in addition to the voice of customer research, we have to do all these other things. And so, is how do we market? How do we track everyone in a CRM or a customer management software? All these different things. How do we present ourselves to the rest of the world? And then I'm trying to think what goes next. So talking to the customers, we launched this early access program. There's a lot of little things that are done sort of ad hoc along the way, like for a first product, what does a business revenue model look like, right? So building the first revenue model, and then we launched this early access program. A lot of people started coming in and sending us their DNA sequences, and then it's like, okay, so now we have to make DNA for people. How do we put all the processes in place to make sure that happens? And so one of the things I've been spending a lot of time on the past few months on is that whole customer fulfillment system. So how do you onboard a sequence? How do you transfer it to manufacturing? How do you track it through manufacturing? How do you successfully get it shipped out? And then what are the systems that you put in place to automate that whole thing? And how do you make them talk to each other in the best way? So I'm working with web developers. I'm working with back-end software where accounts are kept and invoices are made and all these things. I'm working with the CRM, and then working with our internal manufacturing software platform, or at least the geniuses that are developing it, and trying to get some basic level of understanding and making sure everything fits together. So that's more of a project management aspect to what I do. And so, head of innovation is sort of very vague. It can be a lot more specific though. And so maybe at a more mature point in the company, an innovation role can be, okay, we have this core technology. How do we complement it such that we can capture more of the market? What additional technologies can we bring in to sort of, we'll say, extract value from the things that we make? So we make DNA, right? So maybe it's some crazy AI that actually designs novel proteins. Maybe it's cell line development where it takes the DNA that we make and we're making cell lines. There's all sorts of things we can do, right? We could possibly scale the DNA. That's later on. That's not right now. That's really forward looking. But that's innovation. It's not just developing new science and technology. It's creating a customer experience in some cases. It's creating operationally efficient processes. It's all kinds of things. So it's hard to say. I get caught up when you ask, like, what do you do? Because there's like so many things. What's next?
But that's so exciting too. It must keep your days so diverse, right? Every day is something new, something different. And that you're thinking sometimes about the science, sometimes about the process, sometimes about the client, sometimes about the business. And it must be so fulfilling to play all these different roles. We talk a lot on the program about the difference between a large company and a startup, and that what you, at least what you're telling us today is, and you're like a kid in a candy store in a startup environment where you
Yeah.
get to do so many different roles and play such a significant, impactful, uh, function for the company by being the,
Whatever needs to be
whatever
done.
needs to be done, right? The
Yeah.
octopus in the
Yeah.
office with the 8 tentacles.
Yeah.
So neat. What piece of advice would you give somebody who wants to start a company? Because I know you, I mean, with Kind of Sense
Yeah.
and throughout, now with Ansa, you're still in this environment. What is it that you would say to somebody who, like you, is attracted to that type of environment?
Yeah, I think a good place to start is simply understanding product development in a broader sense. So, as PhD students, we're working on something, right? We're developing a technology, we're testing a hypothesis, but how does that thing that you're working on enter the real world, right? What are the mechanisms required to move what you tested, what you developed into a world that has a real impact on people? And so if you can identify that, if you can say, I'm building an assay, it can be used in drug discovery, then it's like, well, how do you take that prototype and then move it toward the market? And then once you figure that out, you start to see, okay, there are all these roles that are required to get the technology from the bench into the market, whether it's product management or regulatory or business finance, maybe intellectual property, marketing, all these different roles that you need to have the expertise of a PhD for, but you also need complementary skill sets. And so understanding all the roles going from bench to the market, I think is it really opens your eyes to the broader ecosystem of how science works,
Yeah.
right? It's not just done in an academic lab at the bench. There's a lot more to it, especially if you move it in a way that it has a real impact on the world.
Mhm. No, that's such great advice, and it seems like preparation. Be thinking ahead of where you are now, because you will need to get there eventually, right? And
Yeah.
know that piece. Um, any pieces of advice for somebody who is looking for a job in a startup? I know you got recruited. That's great. How did you get recruited? How did you get noticed? Did you speak to them ahead of time? Did you meet them at a conference? What was it that how did they get to know about you and find you? Was it through the recruiter?
Yeah. Yeah. No, our investors gave them a list of people, and then they reached out to everyone on the list. So that's, that's my specific thing. But, um, you know, fortunately, I have that history where I can be flagged as someone to go on one of those lists, but not, coming out of a PhD or a postdoc, you don't have that. So how do you do it? And I would say the biggest thing is networking, and talking to people in a way that shows you understand the industry you're trying to get a job in, and you understand something about the role. So just having the vocabulary is really important. And you can get this. So step one is like building that vocabulary and that general understanding of maybe how companies work a little bit. And you can do that by, for example, searching jobs on LinkedIn and looking at the descriptions. And then you start to see all these words that you've never heard and you don't know, but they require a PhD in your field to do the position. So you can start looking, you can start looking into what those words mean. What is upstream process development? I don't know, right? So then you can you can start digging in and understanding that, building your vocabulary, and then you can have the intelligible conversations with people. And that's going to be key to winning interviews and winning in an interview.
So, but with confidence, right? Really
Mhm.
knowing the subject, or really knowing the words, that
Yeah,
the terminology, the lingo. You got to be in the practice of speaking with people within the lingo to gain confidence and not feel like it's something contrived. But as I think, as everybody getting started, a newbie in a new field, it feels uncomfortable, right? It feels like
yeah, yeah. No,
I
it's you get the imposter syndrome,
yes.
right? Just like everybody who gets a PhD has imposter syndrome at some point, and if they say they don't, they're lying.
Yeah.
Um, but it's the same thing when you're trying to enter this new world.
Yeah.
There's some level of imposter syndrome, but if you show that you've put a good faith effort into understanding how to speak the language, I think that's you have a leg up on all of those who haven't put in the effort to learn the language. And there's a lot of ways you can do it. As simple as maybe reviewing the industry standard news sources. For example, a couple times a week, look at Fierce Biotech, look at endpoints, start to get a feel for, here's the lingo, here are the positions, and then reading through those job descriptions will help as well. So you just have to do that. You have to put in the work.
Yes. Fantastic. Such gems of advice. Dr. Steve Ouellette, the head of innovation at Ansa Biotechnologies Incorporated. Thank you so much for being our Pathfinder today. And again, for such great gems. Awesome, just awesome perspective, and great pieces of advice that you've given our audience today. I can't thank you enough.
My pleasure, Tommy. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.